Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to Planet Zoo. We're back in Arcadia and we're making use of the cinematic tools that we have at our disposal with the latest update, and it's incredible. We are going back to Old Town for the first time in a long time, so I thought we might as well experiment with the new cinematic tool and have a little bit of a tour while we catch up on everything that's going to be happening in today's episode, which I'm really excited for because we get to come back to the place where it all began and build a brand new habitat for this area. I forgot how amazing and how proud I am of this build. I really love everything about Old Town, and I'm so excited to be coming back to share a new build in this zone with you guys. So we're just flashing through all of the habitats that we currently have here. That's our skunks over there, and then we'll pan over to our Galapagos giant tortoises and our raccoons before heading over to the llamas, the foxes, the Kowalski's horses, the red deer, and you've already seen some of the other animals that are present here. But today, as titled in this video, which has already kind of given away the surprise, we're going to be bringing a brand new habitat to Old Town, and in particular the farming district, where we'll be introducing the Somali Wild Ass to this zoo. I'll probably, well, hopefully I don't get demonetized for this, but anyway, I hope you enjoy the little cinematic sweep through as the sun sets over Old Town. It's really exciting, and it's such a good feature. It's going to make recording these end of episode tours so much easier, and it's just a really nice way to revisit this location, really. But I'm excited to bring the Somali Wild Ass to this area. I think it's going to be a really cool build, and I'm looking forward to sharing it all with you. And we've got a nice little bit of architecture to do. We're going to do a nice full backstage area, a little bit more detail than usual, I think, and it'll be nice to return to some of my old build styles. But as we do sweep through, I'm noticing things about Old Town that we can improve as well, so maybe some more finishing touches are on the horizon as we rediscover this previously lost area. We're just going to dip into our Kowalski's horse backstage area, which, as you can see, could do with some outside detailing as well. But I've talked too much. Maybe this tour's a little bit too long. If you would like something a little bit lengthier, I'll happily do something a little bit slower so that we can get a nice full view now that we've got some really cool camera tools to play around with. But as we sweep down over to the red deer, we're coming to the location where our wild asses will be. So I hope you enjoyed today's speed build. Let's dive into it and turn this horrible area into something that looks altogether a little bit more beautiful. So I wanted to start by building my wall for this habitat. And I wanted to make something that was a little bit traditional looking, so it kind of needs to look a bit like a old stone wall that would normally line farms and stuff back in the Middle Ages. Interesting fact that I mentioned on stream when I was building this live, what happened with the Roman wall in the UK, Hadrian's Wall, was over a while there was a lot of damage done to that wall when farmers in the local area would start dismantling bits of this ancient wall and using the stone to build walls that would line their farms to mark out the land that they owned, alongside other farmland as well that was owned by a different farmer. So I wanted to kind of lean into that a little bit and create this ramshackle stone wall. And first of all, I needed a base for everything else to attach to, which is why we used some of the larger faux rocks. And then I came in with a lot of smaller ones, and this had a rather large piece count by the end of it, but it was definitely worth it because I think it created a really nice effect. And it was just built using lots of different faux rocks that eventually we would then change the colour of. And the aim here is to kind of overload the original design with rocks so that when I come to actually duplicate and move this around various parts of the habitat, we can actually take out a few rocks here and there so that it doesn't look so samey. And then we can also attach little bits of foliage and things to this as well, and just have little things growing out of it. Maybe take out a few rocks altogether to leave a couple of holes and stuff as if this wall needs repaired, but it's all about making it look natural. And as you can see, it is a little bit of an arduous process. So there were a lot of rocks to put in place here, but it's starting to resemble something that I'm looking for. Skipping ahead, you can see our finished structure here. It's not quite done, we need to change the colours, and then we also need to duplicate this side here and add it to another side so that we have that uniformity on both sides of the wall. Now this is going to be another opportunity to remove some, because these walls would not be exactly the same on both sides. They'd often have like bits where they'd be crumbling in certain areas, and they wouldn't have the same shape rocks all of the time. You've got to remember, we're taking rocks from a very, very old wall that's probably crumbled and deteriorated over time, and we need to get it looking a little bit less uniform. But having an overloaded structure to begin with just means we can take stuff out, and then we start adding it into our barrier area where our Somalian wild asses are going to be contained. Hopefully, after all of this work, they can't jump over it, but I do have some plans in place if it turns out that they can escape. Speaking of escapes, I don't know what's happened with the latest patch, but we've had a number of animals that have somehow managed to find out that there are ways to get out of their confines in Planet Zoo. It's led to escaped cougars, beavers, and moose in our zoo, so I've had to go back and do a couple of adjustments to certain habitats. It all kind of adds up, because at the end of this kind of mini series, as we finish off our tropical and mountain biome, we will be doing a second tour, and this one will feature most of the season 2 builds that we've done, but also I'll be preparing a full tour of the zoo, which will take in all of our zoo so far. So we'll get like kind of an expanded tour of season 1 and season 2 combined, just to show the growth of the zoo as a whole. Anyway, once that was all put in place, I wanted to kind of make some adjustments here to where our staff entrance is, and that just involved making a few simple changes to where our barrier is. So I started by running my wall all the way along and then moving the habitat gate into position. Once that was in place, I just needed to take out a few of the rocks, and that would reveal the gate. Now, I don't plan on making any changes to the actual gate itself. We don't need to put any supporting beams in and stuff. We just need to make sure that we've taken out enough of the rocks to make it fit nicely. And I think we did that. It was pretty easy. Moving on now. This is where things get a little bit more complex. As you can see, there's another habitat on the other side of this building, and I am planning, if it all works out well, putting the sand cat in that other side. But it means this building here, the staff building and the backstage area for our wild asses, is only going to be half finished. And that's okay, I'm fine with that, and I hope you are too. It's just because this building's probably going to change as I start to develop it further. So I didn't want to do too much. I just wanted to put the backstage area, the sleeping area, the little barn for our Somali Wild Ass in first, and then I would adjust everything else to fit. It's simply because I want to make a dual use building for the 2 habitats that are on either side of this building. So that's basically the plan. And it just meant I could do a little bit of detailing here, but the main focus today would be finishing off the entire habitat. And then we'll do the sand fox habitat and finish off by detailing the rest of this building. So there are some minor details in here. We will see them in the tour. There's little bits of props and stuff added in, and we just make sure all of the bedding's put in place. But I really wanted to, like I said, revisit some of my old build styles by using the Arctic wood and the European rustic stonework to create a nice interior for this habitat. And I really liked being able to use these tools again. It was something that I'm familiar with, but also something that I could improve on. Like in my previous builds, I've noticed that there's little bits of overlaps and stuff where it's not quite fitted together how I would like it to. So it was time to improve some of those styles. And I found a nice way to measure things out, which was using this European roof for one of the vendors. And I used that to line up my metal beams and get a nice even distribution throughout the whole area. And that just meant I could have really accurate placement, and we can also, just to let you know, use the mesh to do that as well. But for now I just wanted to use the metal poles here to create a interior divide in our stone and woodwork. Now that we've put most of it in place, I wanted to, I had this little bit of an extra idea that I would have the upstairs area in this barn available for use. So it meant extending the building again, and this is why I didn't want to completely finish off this entire building, because as I adapt and build out habitats, the main interior building here is going to change. And to do that, I wanted to put in a second floor here that would be used for storage, but it also meant that the roof would change as well. I wanted to make a custom floor for this so that the beams were exposed, something a lot like this Planet Zoo basic stuff that we've got, but we can't colour this, so I wanted to make a little bit of a darker wood here, and it just meant I would need to create my own custom floor. And that was done by using the East Asia timber and then the Indonesian timber, just the smaller pieces here. And eventually, that Asian timber would be taken out because I'm only using that to give myself the gap. So you can see here we've got these nice blue pieces that we're then going to take out, and we are left with nice even gaps in our woodwork here. And I thought it was a really nice, effective way to use various different tools, and this is what it's all about. Whilst I can build things very well, often measuring and keeping distance correct and stuff, that falls by the wayside for me, so I tend to struggle with that. And coming up with new ways to kind of make these gaps and make these adjustments and make sure that my measurements are all correct so I don't have any glaring errors in a build is what's going to be important to me now. Next up, we wanted to create an access point for staff, and I thought over here where I would have like a fake door, we would then put a nice big ladder going up into this upstairs area. Obviously it means if there's any larger objects that need to be brought down, there might well be we need to come up with a different way to get that sort of stuff out. Maybe we could put a goods lift in, and that would again involve expanding the back wall a little bit further out so that it was over our staff areas here. But again, that is why I haven't finished this building off, because things always change and develop, and I don't want to build something just for the sake of showing off to then have to come back and re-edit it. So our next step is to build that ladder I was talking about, and I'm going to use my mesh measuring method to show you how it all works and how we get something nice and smooth that looks well put together and like everything has been measured out properly. Now, this all came from the fact that, you know, the Planet Zoo grid is 1 meter is pretty much the smallest you can get, and we need to play around with some of the smaller, more intricate pieces to actually create something that looks really useful and fitting with a habitat. You don't want everything to be so chunky, because when you're playing around with these 4 meter high things, you kind of know, and you can see it in the game, that there is a certain height limit where if you make something too big, it looks very obviously too big. So making like smaller adjustments and stuff and making smaller items is something that's really important as you kind of develop a little bit more as a builder. And as you can see here, I've put a slight rotation on the post, and then we're keeping the wooden slats here a certain length and depth into the actual poles themselves, and that just involves pulling them up using the advanced move and duplicate tool, and then slotting them in using again the mesh as a measurement for us. I'm going to make them nice and red because it invokes a memory for me. When I was a kid, we lived in this house and we had a loft, and the only way to get into the loft was to use this big ladder that my dad had, and it was bright red. The metal on it was bright red, and it was so heavy and chunky, and it was an absolute nightmare to put up. And I think they actually did that as a deterrent to stop me and my sister playing in the loft all the time. So that's kind of a nice little special nod for me. Anyway, once that was in place, you can see there's a nice little gap left where we can fit in the door. And obviously it's not going to be a usable door, but it's going to add a little bit more lore to the build. And we are starting to take shape here. Obviously the main building still has a little bit of work to do, so we're going to continue on with that now. And we're going to use the wooden beams that we've actually put in place here, where our wild asses are actually going to be able to rest and sleep, and we're going to use them to form up the beam foundations of the rest of this building. So you can see here, we're grabbing them all and just copying them into place, and you can see there, they're a little bit off center, so we get some overlapping from the rockwork behind it, which means we're then going to have to adjust the entire structure here, because I don't want these to be offset from what we already have. So we're just going to grab those and move them back into a more appropriate position so that we can continue with the build. Now, after dragging our final beams into place, I'm going to remove a couple of panels here just so that we've got a little bit more to play with and have a little bit more natural light coming in through that bond, because I'm conscious with having that second floor on there that there's not going to be a lot of natural light coming in from above, even if we do make a few adjustments later on. I want to pull these beams out because as I kind of looked around, I ended up extending the height of the ceiling, because when we were in there exploring it, it didn't look like there was a great deal of headroom for staff. Now it was about picking an appropriate upper piece for it, and I do really want to use slate, but I find the flat slate roof pieces look awful. They don't match this nice slate texture with the gradient style of roof pieces. The flat textures are just these weird pieces that don't fit. And as you can see right there, you're looking at that stone roof there, and it does not work. So I decided to go with a little bit more of an unorthodox structure, and this is when I decided not to use slate, because as you can see, those flat pieces, they don't look good. I then went for the corrugated iron, because I really like the texture on this roof piece here. I think it's got some really nice wear and tear on it, and it looks a bit weathered, and we can add to that by putting in some wooden paneling and stuff, and maybe putting in a few extra sheets of corrugated iron on the top as if like a hole's been patched, and then we can use the decals to make it look even more weathered, putting on a bit of moss or something like that, and we're going to do that a bit later on. And then it was about just getting all of this repaired. So this now looks like a whole room on the top here that can be used for storage and all sorts of other things. I had thought about making some hay bales. I have seen some on the workshop, but they're not quite to my tastes, and unfortunately when I did try playing around and making some, it didn't really work out, so I've had to leave that for now. But it might be something that I revisit when we do like a little bit of a finishing touches episode. And I am quite surprised that we've not yet had that added into the game, given that a lot of the animals in Planet Zoo are grazing animals, and a lot of the ones like that are kind of domesticated, like the Przewalski's horses and now the Somali Wild Asses and a few others. They would definitely be eating and grazing on hay, so it would be nice to have some proper hay bales put in place. And the workshop doesn't have a great deal of them, so I may end up creating some myself if I have the time and I can get them looking good. But yeah, once again, we come in with these wooden trims and then give them a nice accent on the sides here, just running up those nice decorative ones and moving them along so that they match up really nice, adding some toppers, and we're starting to get a really nice sense of what this upstairs area in this build looks like. Obviously, it needs a bit more work to complete it. I have put in a few extra bits of fluff, things that I've downloaded from the workshop and use, like the warehouse storage packs and stuff that are linked in a previous video, but I will, once again, I'll link them here. And once that was all done, it looks good enough to kind of finish for the purpose of this habitat. But like I've already said, we're going to come back to this and we're going to finish it all off with some really nice details on it. I just think for the sake of actually cracking on and getting this episode done so that you can see the habitat, that's more important first things first, and it's just the way I like to build. I like to get everything in place in my habitat, get the animals introduced and stuff, and make sure that they can't escape, make sure that they've got the correct enrichment items and the whole habitat is kind of fleshed out and developed, because that does take quite a bit of time. And then obviously I'll probably put the sand cat or whatever animal we decide to put in that next area. Once that's done, we'll come back and we'll put the finishing touches on this building. And that should lead us in nicely to a complete finishing touches episode for the rest of Old Town and the rest of the zoo. Obviously, we still have like maybe 4 or 5 habitats to put in the mountain district, and then we also need to add in another couple, I would imagine, here in Old Town. Now, the one thing we haven't played around with is adding in some new exhibit items and the exhibit areas and things. We are going to need to do that soon so we can move some insects and amphibians and reptiles and stuff out of the research center and into my zoo itself, because we don't have enough of that going on. And this is me starting to play around and try and create some natural looking hay bales, but it didn't go well, and I ended up abandoning that idea altogether. But I did want to prove that I'd actually tried, and I think if you have any ideas or things that I could potentially use to create these hay bales, please drop a comment. I'd be really interested to hear what you think could be used to create them, and then I'll give it a go myself. Maybe we'll do one on stream or something. Anyway, putting in our bedding in our barn area here, really simple. I didn't want to go too overboard with this because it is just a sleeping area. Then adding in all of our enrichment items, and we can finally decorate the habitat itself, because we have a lot to do, but we also have a lot of limitations. The Somali Wild Ass are mainly plains animals that don't have a lot of foliage they've got quite severe limitations on the amount of foliage you can have in a habitat, and that kind of posed a difficulty for us, especially considering they need quite a large amount of space for maneuvering and navigating their habitat. And that has posed probably my biggest challenge yet. I mean, I would say the maned wolf was a big challenge, but I ended up ignoring that, although we are going to have to do something about that and give them a little bit more space to play around in, and reduce their foliage requirement by moving them into their own separate habitat. I'll probably do that off camera though, and it will be included in a tour. But yes, back to the Somali Wild Ass. You can see here we're building up some rock coverage here. Now, this is where things start to develop in my mind, and cogs start turning about how we can make a habitat look full of foliage without it actually taking up any of the foliage requirements. Now you can see here we're putting in these nitrata bushes, and we're going to put a load more in. Now unfortunately, they have a huge impact on the foliage coverage of a habitat. So instantly we were over our limits for the Somali Wild Ass, and given that we've only just started decorating the foliage in this habitat, that is not good. So some changes needed to be made, and I will come back to those later on, but you might, if you're a little bit more of an experienced player, you might know what I'm getting at immediately when I say that. But it was important to get a nice gradient, a nice kind of flow going from the European temperate rocks in the background there, from the red deer habitat, into our more desert biome here for our wild asses. And that was quite difficult, but I really like the way that the textures of the desert rocks merge with the temperate rocks. I think it's a really nice flow. It kind of almost resembles mud before it kind of comes out into this larger rock structure, which is really nice, I think, and it really gave us a lot. And here you can see me just going wild on my foliage, but I do plan on reducing the amount that's in there once I've got a better idea of where my various scenes are going to take place. And we do have a couple of heroes in this build. I will be mentioning them later. The heroes being certain pieces and build structures that we ended up using to make this place look like it was full of foliage without actually filling it with foliage. So I'll talk about that a bit later on. And we also have a water feature that we need to build as well. Now, I didn't go through all of the trouble of actually showing me putting in these water like emitters, because it's a very long and arduous process. I have to run the simulation. It did get dark, and I did have cougars and beavers escaping while I was doing all of it, so we just jump ahead and we carry on as normal. Now it's time to introduce you to the first hero of the piece, and this is probably the main hero of this build, the planted wood panels. Now these have little bits of grasswork and foliage sticking out of them, and they do not count at all to the foliage requirements of any of your animals. So they are a great little additional feature to put in if you're just looking to line some rockery or the sides of a habitat, or just underneath your builds. They have a nice little pop of greenery, and as you can see here, it really starts to flesh out some of our areas, and you just sink them into the ground a little bit so that the whole panel isn't showing through, but you still get a really nice bit of coverage. I then grabbed something from an other section of Old Town, these wooden piles that are tied down, and we brought them into position here. Now they're going to move eventually, and then these pallets of wood that I designed for the back barn are also going to come in and make an appearance too. We take out all of the standard foliage that was attached to it. That was my bad for designing a bad blueprint and attaching stuff. But yes, that was all done, and that immediately gives us an extra scene to play around with. Now, I was looking for some African themed pieces. I thought about using these kilns and stuff to create something, but they didn't quite fit in because what we've got here is a kind of mix of European architecture with that stonework in the barn and stuff, and a desert architecture type structure as well. But we don't want the mix to be too harsh and that contrast to be too in your face, because it will then look a little bit jarring. So we brought in some smaller details of Africa, like the pots and the bead structures and stuff, just to add a little bit of a nod to it, not going too far on things, but making sure that we gave it the theme that it deserved, whilst maintaining the core theme of the entire area that we've got going on here. This isn't an African area, it is still our European area. So whilst we have the Somali Wild Asses in here, they also need to kind of fit in with the overall theme of Old Town. We are going to be building like an African themed area somewhere else in the zoo, if the game actually allows me to and we don't start getting the issues that we previously had. Moving on over, I wanted to build like a sunshade here, so you can see we've got those bead structures in there, and again, it's that tiny little nod to Africa that keeps the theme alive but also maintains the overall theme of the entire area that we are working in here. And once this was put in place, we then added some bamboo and stuff to it, just so that there was actually a sunshade on top of the framework that we've got. And then this all got set back so that it grew almost out of the wall itself. And this basically gives guests a area where they can look and see the animals playing the keyboard and playing the keyboard. That makes me laugh. And then eating from that grazing feeder, the raised feeder there. And it just gives them a little bit of an area where the animals will be able to come in and get some shade, but also it draws guests to that area so they can watch the enrichment items being used there. We could also put the shade over the guests as well, and that would give them a shaded area from the sun or from rain or what have you. And maybe when it rains, they'll all run to that area so that they can have some protection from the rain and also watch the animals. And it did take me a while to settle on something that I was going to use, but using these African wooden barriers here, they really helped. And it just meant I needed to make some tiny adjustments to the wooden structure as well, just to bring it into place and keep it nice and uniform. I then put in a little bit of different movements in the beads here, changed the colors of them so it didn't all look so uniform. Then we got again the bamboo pieces here, we put them into place, and they needed a little bit of a trim because I couldn't actually move the structure anymore, so I added in another African wooden piece to finish it all off and just give it a bit of a lower trim. And these slotted together really nice. I was quite surprised, I wasn't expecting it to work, but they actually sit in there pretty seamlessly. And they also cover up some of the gaps on the lower portion of the bamboo, so it all looks tightly packed and really nice. I was quite happy with that one and quite surprised at how easy it was to get it to work. It then just needed a supporting beam going in to finish it all off, and then that was that structure complete. Really easy, really simple. It just needed some supporting beams finally in the actual the L brackets here. Needed something to keep them supported, so we put in some of the standard slats that I'd been using throughout. They didn't work, so we used, I think these came with the North African pack, and they were really useful and really helped finish this little viewing area off. You can see there's already some guests using it, so we know that this is an area that's kind of like a hotspot for guests. So that's really good to know. And what I will say is, before you do put any of these things in, just have a look at where your guests go. You can actually force them to go to certain areas as well by putting in those vista points and just hiding them. That will draw guests to a specific area of your zoo. And I'm going to play around with that a little bit more when I do a finishing touches episode. But here we are again, putting in those panels. I did also use some of the grass panels as well, just to add some little bits of colour in there. and provide a little bit more of a differential in the landscape. It didn't go too well, so I just left it as it was. Next, I wanted to put in some definitive areas for access so that our mules, donkeys, asses can get into the little pond here in certain areas. Now, I did trim it all with rocks, and then we have these two little areas there you can see where there's a nice little gradient as the animals can gain access to the pond and drink out of it, and they don't do much swimming or bathing. It's a little bit too shallow for it to be bathed in anyway, so yeah, it was all about just tidying that up. And because it was this kind of large structure and I can't actually put any greenery in there to finish it off, we could have come in with the wood panels, but I wanted to do something quite large sticking out of it and make use of some of the other construction pieces that we have at our disposal, because we've got those wonderful wooden tusks and wooden trunks, the claws and things, and I think they make a really nice little structure. And funny enough, these fit in perfectly as I placed them down, and then using these little domes as well just to add some pops of colour, and it kind of looks like this weird little sculpture. And that was all I did. It adds enough to give a nice little extra montage within the habitat itself. Coming in with these large logs because they're the only ones that won't add any coverage, and they just start to form up our brand new water feature here. It's all just water at the moment, so I needed to do something. And these faux branches and faux roots also really helped, so we had some of them sticking out and poking through, changed the colours so that they looked a little bit more like natural wood, and they again start creating these snarling branches that have got caught up in our waterfall. And I'm thinking it's starting to really come together now. And then we're coming to the big reveal of my master plan to make this look like a really foliage heavy habitat without it actually impacting our animals. And you can see we're still continuing to put stuff in there, and then I realized that we'd somehow managed to get to 30% coverage, which is a big shame. I'd really like to not have that limitation. I even tried using these Arctic wood logs that are more decorative items, but they're too decorative and the pine cones and stuff really don't fit in with a theme. Again, I've seen some of the pro builders use these pieces to create these mud flows, and I've experimented with it a little bit before, but only with the Twilight stalactites, so I thought I'd give it a go with this, and I think it worked pretty well. And if I had a bit more time, I would certainly be putting a little bit more work into this and a lot more effort to make it stand out a little bit more. But for now, it was just a little bit of a test to see if I could do it, and yeah, I think it worked out pretty well. But we could do with putting a few more of those into the overall build itself, and maybe again when I come back to sprucing things up, I'll do that. But for now, I'm pretty happy with how it all is, and you can see there the nitrata bushes, they really impact it. And you can already see we've had some offspring born here, which is why the movement and the amount of traversable area has reached that yellow zone. There we are. We're putting in an invisible barrier that we know the Somali Wild Asses can't actually climb over because they can't get over those rocks. And then we come into this large void that we've created in between our habitats and start filling that all up with foliage. And this gives that really nice overgrown feel that I always look for in a build and strive to create. And unfortunately, we don't actually have a great deal of access to that within the game. I suppose we could fill the rest of the habitat with grasses because they have such a minimal impact, but I really like things to look lush and overgrown, even if the animals are a particular breed of grazing animal that need a lot of open space. I still like to have grasses in place because I don't really like the some of the textures of the desert painting and stuff. I think they all look a little bit too flat for me, and I like dimension in my builds. I like things to be vibrant and have multiple kind of textures and layers in them. You probably already know this from having seen everything that I've done so far, but I think it's really important, even if we are building something for a desert-based animal where it would be very arid and there's a lot less foliage to be found. Then we come in with a nice log. Again, I tried with these Arctic decorative pieces, they didn't work, so I went back to the hero and put in these foliage covered panels here, and they look really nice. They're coming out of that log like that is perfect in my opinion. I think it looks great, and it adds just another finishing touch to the build. And they actually jump over this log. I've seen it happen in some of the segments that I've shot that didn't end up making the final cut, but yeah. Then we move these logs into position here, and I thought this looks a little bit bare. So once again, we bring in these panels. We don't want to use these too much though, so I need to come up with something else. And that was when I thought we'll put in some of these conservation little insect hotels, and then we can put in a few extra bits and pieces here. So we put in this little trailer. The plan was to fill it with vegetables and stuff, and then have a little bit of a spill of vegetables on the ground. So it looks like a keeper's come in here and thrown down a load of veg for our animals, but also the insects might turn that into mulch, and they have somewhere where they can come and feed in their hotels. So it's like a nice 3-course buffet for them. That's a really nice little insect resort there that they've got. They've got the little log hides, then they can go and spend some time in the tied up logs. They've got stuff in the cart that they can feed on. So this has become more of a habitat for the insects than the donkeys that we have here. Anyway, we are just about to wrap up and move into our tour, which again makes use of the brand new cinematic camera. I hope you enjoyed this build. I had a lot of fun doing it. It was very in-depth, and it was fun to get back to Old Town. So I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Thank you all for watching. Do comment, let me know what you liked about this one, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.